Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today's conversation is with the incredible Kristin Bride. If you have a child with a device, you need to listen to this conversation. It's all about anonymous apps and the danger that these pose to our children. Kristin lost her child, Carson, at 16 to suicide after being viciously cyberbullied through anonymous apps that were connected to Snapchat. Today, you're going to learn what anonymous apps are, why they're terrible, and how to find them on your child's phone and protect them from being tortured through these anonymous apps. This episode is sponsored by Bark Technologies, which is a parental controls company that allows parents to protect their children from online harms like those you will learn about today. I'm so grateful that parents of today have a safe phone in Bark that makes our kids' entire digital experience safer. Let's get into my conversation with Kristin Bride. Kristin, thank you for being here and joining me again. You first told me Carson's story in December of last year, which I can't believe that it's been that long. I first learned about Carson several months before that. And to be honest, Carson was like a trigger for me that changed my life and my trajectory. He was the first child I read about who was fatally harmed by social media's defective design. And it was really like a light bulb moment where I realized social media can kill our kids. Like they're not protected on there at all. And my kids are going to start asking for it. And what the hell do I do? How are parents still letting their kids on here when it can be deadly to them? And so I truly started this podcast like to expose the harms and help advocate for solutions after hearing Carson's story. And in my first ever episode about the connection between social media use and suicide, I talked about Carson, and you were the first parent survivor I had the honor of interviewing. So I just want to thank you for that and for speaking out and changing so many people's lives.
Well, thank you for doing what you're doing, Nikki, by spreading awareness. You are a hero in so many ways, and the voice to our stories and the voice to the harms.
Thank you, Kristin. I'm just doing anything I can. And I think once people hear these stories, there's no going back from it. You will do all you can to help protect other children and your own child. And so Carson passed in 2020 at 16. And unfortunately, the platform functionality that plagued Carson persists. So if parents didn't happen to listen to our first interview, can you briefly remind them about what anonymous apps are and the role that they played in Carson's situation?
Sure. So yes, my son died by suicide in June 2020. We had waited to give him his first phone, and he was in high school when he asked for his first app, which was Snapchat. So we knew he had Snapchat, but what we didn't know is that Snapchat had allowed two anonymous apps onto their back end of their product, so that kids could ask questions, so that the kid asking the question was identified, and then the responses back to that child were all anonymous. Carson had a private account. So these were all kids from his high school that were doing this to him. It was during COVID. He was trying to connect in a positive way. And everything he got back was sexually harassing, humiliating, threatening. And he received 100 of those messages before he ended his life. We had no idea this was going on. We had talked about different bullying issues in person at school and addressed them. But unfortunately, so many kids do not tell their parents when they're being bullied online. Mm-hmm. When you look at the history of anonymous apps, the ones on Snapchat at the time that were used to cyberbully my son were YOLO and LMK. Mm-hmm. But if you go back decades, anonymous apps have been around for that long. They always lead to cyberbullying, and then typically a suicide, and then they shut down, and then a new one comes to market, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. How did you find out that anonymous apps were involved? Because I know everything on Snapchat is already pretty anonymous.
We heard through the school community because we were trying to figure out why Carson did this. And we had heard that he had been cyberbullied over YOLO. And I was like, what is YOLO? I had never even heard of it. Mm-hmm. And so that's when we looked at his phone. He fortunately took photos of the
Oh,
abuse.
okay.
Because as you know, with Snapchat, it's disappearing messages.
Mm-hmm.
He did everything in his power to find out who was doing it to him, reaching out to close friends, but because it was anonymous, they didn't know. When you have anonymous apps, you can't really have an upstander saying, hey, knock it off, Fred.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows. And then you, as the victim, are wondering, is it one? I think if he knew it was like the one kid who was always a jerk in his class,
Mm-hmm.
that would have been different than wondering, is it the whole class? And
Yeah.
so it leads to a lot of psychological damage, especially with teens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And peer approval is so important at that age.
Filed a national class
Right.
action lawsuit
Mm-hmm.
against Snapchat, YOLO, and LMK.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, Snapchat immediately took off the two anonymous apps, YOLO and LMK, off their platform that were connected on their back end over their SnapKit. That was something that allowed startup companies to connect with their API so that there was one login and they were virtually connected. And so that happened right away. And then 6 months later, they made policy changes saying that they would not allow anonymous apps on their back end because they could not mitigate the risks at an acceptable level.
Okay. And have they stuck with that, Snapchat?
They don't have them on their SnapKit, but the new one that we're going to be talking about, NGL, does allow, there's a button to copy the link from NGL to Snapchat or Instagram.
Okay. And just to touch on Instagram really quickly. So do LMK and YOLO or NGL, do any anonymous apps integrate with Instagram?
Well, NGL does. After we filed the lawsuit, LMK and YOLO shut down.
And then
So
NGL appeared.
Right. So we have 6 months of heaven where there isn't, although YikYak came back on college campuses, unfortunately, during that time. That's another one.
Okay.
It leads to all sorts of problems. There was a 6-month period where we didn't have anything. And then I started hearing from people that, have you heard of NGL? Not going to lie, it's a new anonymous app. It had connected, I believe, to Instagram. What we were most concerned about is that we were hearing that kids were being charged for subscriptions to identify who was harassing them. And they were not receiving that information. They were receiving very broad hints like lives in the Boston area, you might be able to ride your bike to their house, have an iPhone 13. And so the teens writing into Apple and Google were saying how scammed they felt they were.
Yeah.
So I was trying to, raise awareness of that at the same time talking about what happened to Carson on anonymous apps. And we ended up eventually filing an FTC complaint about this fraud with Haley Hinkle from Fair Play and myself. And we did that in October of 2023. And there was just a recent settlement that provided even more shocking information than what we thought. In the settlement, the FTC had to investigate and subpoena all their records. What the two co-founders did was that they initially started to market the product. It only had 1,000 users subscribe. And part of me thinks there was a lot of press after Carson died and the lawsuit that we filed about the dangers of anonymous apps. And I would like to think that maybe that was contributing to it. So they needed to find a way to get more kids on. And so they chose to send fake messages to the kids, making it seem like it was their friends. And these were, for the most part, really disturbing messages for a teen, such as your friend has a secret about you. We know what you did. Are you sure you're straight? That the kids were then writing in or emailing them saying, this is really disturbing. They were writing in the reviews, these messages are creepy. My friend's self-harming over it. My friend has considered suicide over it. And the two co-founders, they actually said suckers, LOL, to each other. And so there is just no words for somebody like that. I don't understand how they can sleep at night. They're clearly putting profit over kids' mental health and then laughing about it
Mm-hmm.
when they're harmed. And they also were collecting, they collected $4.5 million in subscriptions from the fraudulent subscriptions
Wow.
that never revealed what they were going to do. And
Wow.
probably, Nikki, one of the most hurtful things that was revealed to me personally, it was revealed in the settlement, but so hurtful to me, is that they were reading about what happened to Carson on YOLO. And they actually reached out to Gregoire Henrion, the CEO of YOLO, the now defunct anonymous app, asking for design advice for their own. And that, somebody who actually has knowledge that this has created a suicide and caused harm,
Uh-huh.
and then is reaching out to the original co-founder of that design to get advice. I just think it doesn't get any lower than that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you report about these things like every week, and it's absolutely astounding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I have been advocating for the Kids Online Safety Act. I love the Senate version because it requires a duty of care for all size companies. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what we really need, because when we look at this example, it's very much like a micro Meta. There were internal employees saying, hey, I don't feel so good about the fact that we're sending these fake messages.
Yeah.
But the two co-founders said, don't worry about it. I
Yeah.
mean, we've seen this on a much larger scale at Meta.
Yeah.
And so all these companies need a duty of care. Unfortunately, they just don't have it within their own human capacity to not want to hurt kids for profit.
Wow. I will continue to be surprised, I think, at the levels that these executives, these tech executives, will go to profit off of our children's mental health harms, off of their suicides, off of their torture. I mean, there's nothing positive about this app, yet NGL markets itself as a safe app for children and teens.
Mm-hmm.
And this is false. So what happened from the FTC ruling? So they
So
found violation of COPPA, and what happened after
yeah,
that?
also violation of COPPA. So they were collecting data from 13-year-olds under 13. I'm not sure what the fine is going to be there, but
Okay.
they do have to pay the $4.5 million in subscription fees back to the kids who
Really? Wow.
purchased the subscription.
Good.
And they have a $500,000 fine. But, what I would like to see is that they close
Mm-hmm.
this app. And as it stands now, they're still out there. They did require that they have to be over 17 to be on it, but as you know, Nikki, age gating doesn't really work.
Yeah. How do we get to a point where apps like this are not allowed to exist because they're fraudulently marketing themselves as safe and then they're harming children? So what do we need to do?
Well, I know. I mean, we need to stop these people.
Mm-hmm.
And this was not free speech. This was part of a design, and the
Mm-hmm.
speech was used to harm the kids as
Mm-hmm.
part of the design, to keep them engaged,
Mm-hmm.
to keep them buying the subscription that did
Mm-hmm.
not reveal what it said it was going to reveal. I mean, it's criminal on so many
I
different
know.
levels. I mean,
And they can't claim free speech because they wrote it. It's not someone else's speech.
right. I just would have hoped that these two would hide in embarrassment after what came out.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're trying to figure out how to do the paying back. But I just think, as much as we can warn parents to not have your kids do anonymous apps, the stuff alone from the kids who don't have any accountability is bad enough.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've learned that the actual design of the apps encourages bullying.
Pausing here to take a breath and to tell you about an incredible tool that you can use to protect your children from dangerous apps. and that is the Bark phone. The Bark phone goes way beyond screen time monitoring. It uses advanced AI to scan their texts, social media, images, videos, and even audio for threats like anonymous apps, drug content, cyberbullying, and even CSAM. There's so much for parents to worry about when it comes to our kids' phones that tools like Bark can help us to protect them. We can restrict apps that are dangerous for kids, like the anonymous apps that Kristin is talking about today. The Bark phone is the most customizable kids' phone. It has text and social media monitoring built in, and it really is the safest option. But if you are going to go with an Android or an iPhone, please consider layering on the Bark app, which is high-tech parental monitoring that scans their activities for harmful activity. You can block certain websites and apps and a lot more. So back to my conversation with Kristin.
I mean, going back to the Kids Online Safety Act,
Mm-hmm.
they have to have a duty of care, these companies, to prevent and mitigate cyberbullying. Now, I would say that this is a perfect case that would be a violation of that when the design is to cyberbully kids through bots.
Right. Okay. So a couple things. In order for parents to protect their children from these apps, I think just go on their phone and search for them, remove them through your parental controls, make them unavailable. So that's NGL. And then what other apps currently exist under the anonymous apps category?
Tellonym is another one. YikYak really targets, it has geofencing, so it really targets college kids in certain areas. But I think it's University of North Carolina actually banned it from their campus, is blocking it. When we advocate for COSA on the Hill, there's a lot of staffers that were in college when YikYak was around, and they remember the extreme abuse that occurred.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just, teaching your kids, if you can't put your name by something, then maybe you're not proud of it, and maybe you shouldn't do it.
Right. We can already see from Snapchat and all the nefarious activity happening there because it's anonymous or that the snaps disappear. We know that's not good for them, and we know that that's causing issues for kids. But this is the whole purpose of these anonymous apps, is to torture children with things, and especially if it's false information and not even verifiable, or the kid can't even figure out who's doing it to them.
And can you even imagine the online, or just the drama it creates when you get a message your best friend has a secret about you? That's the last thing a vulnerable teen needs.
And then to say you can pay money to figure out who it is, but then not even tell them who it is, just give them hints. It reminds me a little bit of Snapchat, where if you upgrade to Snapchat Plus, you can see where you land on your friends, like top 8, and you can see who looks at your snaps 2 times. Like, the only purpose of that is to create drama. There's no positive value to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you give listeners just a brief rundown on COSA? So the Kids Online Safety Act passed through the Senate 91-3, and they kind of joined it together with COPPA 2.0. So now it's COSPA, KOSPA in the Senate. But in the House, we're still talking about COSA.
COSA, right.
And so tell parents why you think that the Kids Online Safety Act needs to pass through the House.
It definitely needs to pass through the House because it needs to be signed into legislation this year. I mean, we are running out of time. We do understand that the House is going to take this on as soon as they come back from recess. That's the week of September 9th. But what we need your listeners to do is to reach out to we're on the House side, so their U.S. representative, ask them to co-sponsor COSA so that we can get as many co-sponsors on board during this summer recess before they come back, which will help hopefully propel it forward in September.
Okay. And listeners can go to house.gov, put your zip code in, and find out who your rep is if you don't already know. I am also going to schedule a meeting at my local office of my representative and go in person to talk to them in person. But you can definitely just send a little email or a phone call, and often it just goes to voicemail, and just leave that voicemail or send that message saying, co-sponsor COSA, please. It's time we need to start saving kids' lives instead of harming kids on these platforms. And COSA is the first step, right, in getting kids protected online. Okay, Kristin, thank you so much for updating parents on NGL, anonymous apps, giving the background on COSA and the need for that bill to pass through the House. We're so appreciative of parents like you for continually speaking up and using your voice to protect our children. So, Kristin, thank you again for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Nikki. We appreciate your work as well.
You're welcome.